Hello, and welcome to the 2024 Distinguished Lecture sponsored by the Gregorian University Foundation. My name is Bill Whalen, and I am the Chair of the Board of Trustees of the Foundation. On behalf of my fellow trustees, we are very honored that you have chosen to join us for the very important topic we will cover today. The Gregorian University Foundation is a US-based not-for-profit organization that provides millions of dollars each year to support the Pontifical Gregorian University in Rome. The Gregorian University is the international Jesuit university focused on creating inspired and discerning servant leaders for the Universal Catholic Church. It is where the Church does its thinking. The Greg, as it is known, educates 3,000 select students a year, women and men, lay and religious, from 150 countries all over the globe. The Jesuit tradition of academic excellence focuses on ecumenical scholarship, biblical research, advanced theological studies, and canon law. Our specialized programs, such as safeguarding, discerning leadership and management, and interreligious studies, address the ever-changing needs of the Church and the world. Gregorian graduates form the nucleus of future church leaders as pastors, teachers, bishops, spiritual guides, and many other important roles. At our foundation, we are investing in the next generation of enlightened leaders for the Universal Catholic Church. If you believe, as I do, that Jesuit education can change lives and make for a better world, you will agree there is no more worthy Jesuit cause in the Pontifical Gregorian University in Rome. It is now my pleasure to introduce Father Michael McFarland of the Society of Jesus, who will introduce our lecturers and moderate today's discussion. Father McFarland is concluding his very successful tenure this month as the president of the foundation and will be succeeded starting next month by Father Thomas Merkel, S.J., who is finishing up his important work at Creighton University in Omaha. We will miss Father McFarland and wish him much success and happiness in his next Jesuit assignment at Campion Jesuit Center in Massachusetts. I now give you Father McFarland.
Thank you, Bill. Hello, everyone. I'm glad you were able to join us today. The Gregorian University has always been deeply rooted in the Catholic Church's traditions and teachings. Yet, in true Jesuit fashion, it brings those teachings into dialogue with the issues, concerns, and experiences of the world around it. We have an outstanding example of that in today's presentation on the safeguarding of children and other vulnerable people, an effort that began at the Gregorian in response to the abuse crisis that has so deeply affected the Catholic Church and many other institutions around the world. Today, we have two outstanding experts who are deeply committed to helping the victims of abuse and preventing it from happening to others. Father Hans Zollner of the Society of Jesus is both a trained clinical psychologist and a theologian. He is the president of the Institute for Anthropology, Interdisciplinary Studies on Human Dignity and Care. That's a mouthful, so we'll call it the IADC at the Gregorian University. Father Zollner has been called the Church's leading child protection expert by no less than The Tablet, the highly respected English Catholic journal. Father Zollner received his degree in psychology from the Gregorian University as a Jesuit seminarian, then came back as a faculty member in psychology after he was ordained a priest. He soon added administrative duties to his teaching and research, becoming Dean of Psychology and academic vice rector. Starting in 2012, in response to the growing crisis in the Church over the abuse of children and other vulnerable individuals, he was part of a steering committee to set up the Center for Child Protection and became its director. The center trained professionals from all over the world on the structures, attitudes, procedures, and protocols needed to prevent abuse and human trafficking, and on how to deal with the cases that arise. In 2021, the CCP expanded to become the IADC, an academic unit of the Gregorian University with its own faculty and degrees. This has allowed Father Zollner to extend his programs to other locations and populations and to expand its scope to include research into the causes of abuse and how best to counter them. Father Zollner has traveled throughout the world, giving talks and seminars, consulting and advising various religious and secular organizations on this crucial topic. Heather Banis is a clinical psychologist who specializes in trauma, particularly in the lives of children. She first began working with the Archdiocese of Los Angeles in the Victims Assistance Ministry in 2005 and has served as the coordinator of that ministry since 2016. She additionally serves as a consultant to the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops Committee for the Protection of Children and Young People. Dr. Banis holds a master's degree in theology and leadership from Gonzaga University and a PhD from the University of Southern California. While teaching at Occidental College, her alma mater, she began working with the Archdiocese of Los Angeles in Victims Assistance Ministry. And since 2016, she has been that ministry's coordinator. A frequent public speaker, Dr. Banis was honored to speak at the USCCB General Assembly in November of 2018, addressing all the bishops from the United States regarding their pivotal role in responding to victims of clerical sexual abuse. She's spoken to many other important groups, including the annual Child and Protection and Youth Protection Catholic Leadership Conference, to the clergy in the Archdiocese of Seattle, to the Canon Law Society annual meeting, and most recently to the St. Paul University Center for Safeguarding Minors and Vulnerable Persons International Conference in Ottawa. The book Theology in a Post-Traumatic Church, edited by Dr. John Sheveland, contains a chapter by Dr. Banis entitled Resiliency, Hope, Healing, Victim Assistance Ministry in a Trauma-Sensitive Theological Context. In addition to serving as a consultant to the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops Committee for the Protection of Children and Young People, Dr. Banis is a member of the North American Continent Working Group of the International Safeguarding Committee. So I'm glad to turn it over to the two of you to help us understand this problem in the church and also in the very positive ways in which the church is meeting it.
Thank you, Father
Hello,
Michael.
everybody.
Yes. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for those introductions, Father Michael. Father Hans and I were chatting in preparation for this, and we thought we would start actually with an international focus, since we're recently completed the conference in Rome on safeguarding, and since you've been traveling quite a bit since then, Father Hans, maybe we can start by hearing a little bit about what you were doing in Bali and what's going on in safeguarding in that part of the world.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Heather, and thank you for the invitation, and thank you for all those who are present now for this lecture and for this conversation. Let me just put up here a presentation. Unfortunately, my Windows says that I can't activate it. Can somebody from the tech team here allow me to share my screen, which shows the first slide. Actually, the title of this conference is Safety and safeguarding as a process. And the second slide would show a photo of where I have been last week in Indonesia on one of the 6,000 islands of that country that is inhabited. Indonesia has 11,000 islands, but 6,000 are inhabited, and one is Bali. Which is a very nice place to stay and to come together. Now, the Jesuit safeguarders for the Jesuit provinces in East Asia and Pacific met last week for a 5 days workshop, and I was giving 2 days of that workshop. So you see people from the Jesuit provinces, from Australia, Japan, Philippines, Korea, China, Indonesia, Vietnam, East Timor, Cambodia, Thailand, and Myanmar. So a very diverse group and a very well formed. I was very pleased to meet them there. I had met them earlier a year ago in Australia at their annual conference and gathering. And I'm really happy to say that of this group, 5 of them have completed the program of Diploma in Safeguarding at our institute at the IADC, and 3 more were my students in the Institute of Psychology. So half of the participants were formed at the Gregorian, and more specifically at our 2 institutes, the Institute of Psychology and the Institute of Anthropology. And what I can say is that I have seen over the last maybe 5-6 years a real growth around the globe about how people think, talk, discuss, and act on safeguarding issues. And that has reached now regions like, in this case, East Asia Pacific, that a few years back, maybe 10 years back, there was no talk about it. There was just denial. It was considered a problem of the West, and especially an American problem. But now people realize that the question of abuse and safeguarding of minors and vulnerable people is a task for every culture, for every country, for every continent.
It's a powerful image, and the first thing I notice when I look at it is in the United States, that picture would be predominantly women. Not that it's exclusively women in safeguarding by any means, but in the state of California, where I am, for example, all the victims assistance coordinators, my counterparts, we're all women. So it just speaks to the cultural context and the distinctions in the very important distinctions and need to understand that context, I think, for this important work that's going on. The other thing that I love about the photograph is just that it makes it visible, because I sometimes think we are the most invisible ministry in the church in a lot of ways, because so much of the safeguarding in the protection end of things is done behind the scenes, if you will, and then people go into the ministry. They do the training or the preparation, but then they go into ministry. Or if we are accompanying survivors, that by its nature is often completely private. And so it's not a very visible ministry in that sense. So I just love seeing the photograph from that perspective as well.
Yes, and I really think it conveys also the real atmosphere that was created by some positive energy and a lot of commitment. And coming back to your first observation about the differences, yes, in many parts of the world, also for financial reasons, the work that is being done in the church and also in this field of safeguarding is tied to priests or to religious sisters. Now, that is also because the resources are very limited, and but in terms of process, more and more also among these people from, for example, China or Philippines, they work with many women, lay people, experts in the field who have been trained in specific tasks, for example, on the legal side or on the psychiatric side. And this is one of the elements of the process as we speak about safety and safeguarding as a process. It is not only a process that the topic gets to every corner of the world, but also a change of attitude and a change of collaboration. I think one important message for me was from last week's meeting, safeguarding needs to have a positive narrative, and that goes to your second point, which you made, the invisibility, and sometimes also the lack of general support or the impression that safeguarding is singled out as something that has to deal with the ugliest part, the sexual violence, especially when it comes to sexual abuse against children. But we need to get the message across that safeguarding is really an engagement and commitment for a better world. And this is what I would like to point out in this slide here. Safeguarding, as I would define it, the creation of safe space, the development of safe processes, and the living out of safe relationships. And what I would like to stress here is that safeguarding goes way beyond sheer prevention measures, setting up guidelines and safety concepts. This is necessary, this is indispensable. However, if we stick only to that, to the legal part, to the normative part, then we miss a very important point that all of us within the church, in every community, in every diocese, in every religious community, in every Catholic school, in every retreat house, whatever you have, in every kindergarten, we need to make sure as much as possible that people can feel safe and live their lives wholesome and in a respected and respectful way.
I really appreciate the emphasis on process and on a positive narrative around this. I feel like there's no doubt in my mind in the United States, what we are doing today was born out of crisis. We found ourselves imploding as a church, as revelation after revelation of abuse by clergy became known and became public. And there's no doubt we were in crisis mode, but I struggle with that word now because I feel if we're still framing this as a crisis, or even as a scandal, exclusively as a scandal, that creates a mindset that is not going to serve us well in the long run. And in reality, this is a phenomenon, right? And it exists in the church, but not exclusively in the church. And so I think what you've got on the screen there captures the possibility, the spirit of what we should be doing in terms of cultivating in our church and all the ministries, all the relationships that those ministries are based on, this embodiment of right relationship as was exemplified by Jesus, that we are safe, we are confident of goodwill towards one another, that we have voice and agency and are respected, and that there is an expectation that others are treated with that same respect. And so for me, when I think about what we have in the United States, the Charter for the Protection of Children and Young People, it details some very specific things that we must do, and we are doing them. but you can do them like a checklist and say, okay, we've got that, and be done and take a sort of minimalist approach to it. Or you can see that as a platform to fulfill what I consider the spirit of the charter, which is really what you're talking about here, creating safe space for all, processes that are safe for all, and in the context of right and safe relationship. And I think it's that elevation to that next level that is so important and moves us out of crisis mode, right? And into thinking much more broadly about who we should be as church. So I really appreciate that structure that you've given us on this slide and that thinking, because I think it helps us elevate and then think about the long term. This is not something that goes away or that we fix and we're done with. This is essential to who we are as church, in my opinion.
Very well said, and I would just like to underline three things. First, safeguarding is part and parcel of every single mission within the church. Whether you celebrate liturgy, whether you give a retreat, whether you care for the homeless, whether you assist the dying, whatever you do within the church, that has an element of safeguarding in it, or it fails to really put in practice what our mission is. Secondly, we here at the Institute, also in our pedagogy, we try to convey to our students that our work is not done by simply giving lectures or writing guidelines or setting up meetings. What we need to aim at is that we really get across the necessity to change attitude, and therefore to go to a different way of teaching also, to allow for a more personalized and internalizing process. So where I really understand, not only by cognitive process, by knowledge, and not only by memorizing the norms, but by heart, what is necessary to do and what I can contribute. And this is the third thing. Every single person can contribute to the ongoing process of safety and safeguarding. And no one has nothing to contribute. Everybody can, in his or her own way, do something. The people in the pews, as well as the Pope, the professor, the teacher, the kindergarten personnel, in administration, in wherever you are engaged, in your parish, in your communities, whatever they are and whatever they look like, you have something to say. And that is on this slide, which would summarize for me also the question of the process, because of course we need guidelines, general rules, principles, and procedures. We need to spell out what are the consequences. We need policies which give content to the guidelines, adapted to the specific institution and to reality. And here there would be much to say about the cultural changes and the cultural realities, not only in countries far away, but also in your church in the United States, for example, where you have within certain dioceses like Los Angeles, where Heather and myself met earlier this year. I think you have 30 or so languages in liturgies represented in the cathedral in Los Angeles itself. So that is also one of the challenges that we have to face. But guidelines and policies need to translate into practices, lived policies. It's not only done by ticking off that we have done our policy work or we put our guidelines on the shelf, and that only will create and form different attitudes and change mentality. This is, as Heather said, this is a long-term project. This is not done once and for all. This is not done tomorrow. And if people ask me how long this is still a relevant topic, I would say it will continue to be, and necessarily so. So forget about it that it will be over tomorrow. It will take for many more years until we get to some change of mentality. Mentalities change over decades, not over months or years. And therefore, the process from theory to lived practice is that what we're encouraged to do, also in the words of Pope Francis, which I would quote here in a letter from the 4th of August 2019, 5 years back, in which he said, if in the past our mission may itself have been a kind of response, today we desire conversion, transparency, sincerity, and solidarity with victims to become our concrete way of moving forward. This in turn will help make us all the more attentive to every form of human suffering. What I like about this is it's not only about sexual abuse, it's not only about sexual violence against minors or people at risk. It is what the church, what Jesus's example is all about, attending in a respectful, in a dignified, in an empathetic way to people who have been wounded or who run the risk to be harmed grievously. And this is part and parcel of the mission of every Catholic, of every parish, of every community, of every diocese.
A couple of things that strike me about that, this idea of us internalizing. I think one of the things that we need to say explicitly and remember always is that we have to listen and lift up the voices of those who have the lived experience and those who've been harmed, those who have lived through abuse in their church and yet are somehow able to come to the church to make that disclosure, to make that known, and in many instances seeking to heal in the context of the church. Not always, but often. And so I think this concept of solidarity with victims that our Pope Francis has spoken about here and you've reminded us of is essential. And what I'm finding is the longer I do this ministry, the longer I'm in this ministry, and the more relationships I'm building with survivors, the more I'm learning. I'm constantly learning nuances from survivors who are willing to share with me and share with my colleagues, so that what started off as we have to have this program or we have to check these people's fingerprints, what started off with very precise and specific acts is now in the much broader context of us understanding how to accompany those who have been harmed in meaningful and impactful ways, in addition to implementing preventive measures, protective measures that are informed by the lived experience of those survivors. So I'm always so grateful to any survivor who's willing to talk through with me not only what they experienced, but then what they've learned. If only this had been in place, or if only somebody had done that, I might have been able to come forward as a child, or I might have been able to come forward decades ago. So it's this constant learning, but you have to cultivate in your ministry this receptivity to this and this respect for lifting up the voice of the survivor and collaborating, co-creating with survivors, many of whom not only have the lived experience, but I find too have also got the academic background now to complement that as well. I find for some it has actually inspired them to go pursue education in a related field. And so there's a wonderful synergy there of knowledge and capacity that I think it's really important that we recognize and build on.
Yeah, and this building on is also part of our programs here. We always invite survivors of clergy sexual abuse to meet the students and to witness to their story, which is very often a very hurtful one and not always a reconciled or a peaceful one after years, decades of shame, of loneliness, and of the reminder that one cannot undo one's own story. But I also, over the years, have received so much from many survivors from all corners of the world, who, with all the difficulties they go through, and in all probability something will stay with them forever, but many of them have also come to a point of finding some solace, at least, some possibility to move on in their lives, to reach out to people. And I personally would say that many of them have told me and taught me something about the mystery of salvation that I never met in the books of theology or in the lectures that I was hearing or reading during my theology studies. So there is a lived experience of hope also in not all, but in at least in some of the victims also of clergy sexual abuse, but also in families, in sports associations, or in the Boy Scouts, or wherever abuse is happening. Fortunately, there are also people who attend to those needs, and this is also part of our education and formation program, how to listen to survivors. And these are this is one type of the positive narrative that yes, once you are wounded and the wound closes, a scar will remain, but wounds can close, and many survivors have had also the possibility to share that and what helped them in their journey. The other side of the positive narrative is that when we meet people from all over the globe, and we have students from, as was said in the introduction, from more than 130, 150 countries, we realize that this is not something that remains at the superficial level. Last week, I've heard in 2 homilies by the Jesuits who attended our diploma program how much they lived that as a conversion experience. This was very moving for me, that they spoke out also publicly in the homilies about this. I mean, they were asked to do the course, they came to Rome, and they thought, okay, what do you do a whole semester in studying something that is as clear as, I mean, protect the vulnerable ones. But then they realized how important it is to not only to study and to read. This is also part, of course, of a formation program of that kind. But it is much more also to reflect, to discuss with the colleagues, to pray over it, and then to try to enculturate, to bring it back to the stories, to the symbols of one's own culture, of one's own context. And that is something that gives me much hope when I meet people from all over the globe who have been trained by us and go back and find open doors and sometimes also resistance, but they move on. They try to get the message across, and many of them can tell a lot of success stories. However, it is a question of process, and this is what needs our effort and our sustainable planning, managing, and continuous work of research also. We have one of our efforts in our research activities is to find out what makes it effective when safeguarding measures are disseminated. Because unfortunately, in our field, many people talk about it, many people are using the buzzwords, but many of these concepts that we use constantly are not very clear, not even to the people who work with them every day. Like, what is it? What makes safeguarding measures like guidelines, like trainings, like retreats or whatever you have, what makes it really effective? And this is one of our lines of research that we try to pull because it's highly necessary for the church, but way beyond. What I have said just now is also true for any type of organization. The worlds of sports or cinema, of any youth activity needs very much clarity so that our efforts become more focused and more effective.
You're raising an incredibly important point, I think, about not only do we need to convert hearts, but then we also need to understand what it is that we're doing that's working well, what could work more effectively, and what maybe we're pouring a lot of energy into something that actually isn't having that much impact. And doing the research around that is incredibly important because resources are limited. And we need to be utilizing the things that have the most effectiveness. In the same breath, we were talking earlier before we got on screen about how there is no one tool that's going to fix everything or prevent everything or resolve everything. And what I really appreciate about what we have in place here in LA is we have, and it's by no means exclusive to us in Los Angeles, but we have a team approach and a web of safety practices in place. So I've been talking about my ministry, Victims Assistance Ministry. That's in my heart, that's near and dear to me. But there are 4 wonderful women in my office. We collaborate on an hourly basis with our legal department, which is attuned to justice and trauma sensitive. We work with the Vicar for Clergy, which is, I call it priest personnel. And we are collaborating with them on each matter. We work with, and on prevention, we work with our communications team, who has been through this. A couple of the members of that team have been with us since the early 2000s. So there's an incredible sensitivity there. So it's this team approach, this collective response that allows us to layer in all these safeguarding elements and response elements that I think are so critical. And we need a deeper understanding of what they're all contributing, but it is a package deal, right? Because it's not, as you said, it's every single ministry that we go forward in has at its heart safeguarding and right relationship. And if we aren't attending to that, we're setting ourselves up for another crisis and another scandal and another period of the church harming instead of the church being a refuge. And so I think this combination of the theory, the research, and then the lived practice, we have to be talking in those circles and dialoguing with one another constantly in order to keep lifting this up and taking it where I think it needs to go. And I guess the other piece that now brings me to it that makes me feel a little exhausted when I think about all that is self-care and the care for those who are in ministry, our clergy who are out in all of our parishes and all of our programs, the people that are doing the accompaniment work of survivors, the people that are setting up all the safeguarding programs, all of us, the self-care that is essential if we're going to be able to continue to do this work in a healthy way. And I'd love to hear what you think, because I know self-care is also something that you're very committed to.
Yeah, just one word about that, because I realized last week when I was with the guys in Indonesia that many of them go to the limits of their capacities precisely because they are empathetic, because they are committed, and because they have very little resources and companionship within their their situations. I mean, simply because there are very few experts and very few people dedicated specifically to that work. That's why it is important to have experts, but it is also important to reach out to other people so that you can really rely on them, and you can, as you said, you can create a web, a network of people who move on in the same line with the same, at least intention, not in the same intensity perhaps. And I gave actually one part of my workshop was on self-care, from a psychological, from a physical body, from an emotional, and from a spiritual point of view. And that was, I believe, that was one important element of the workshop, because the feedback was such that they said, yes, finally we have also heard about it, and now we can give ourselves also the permission to take care of ourselves. And it's not like we need to run and exhaust and become exhausted because we are running alone, but we also take a break so that we can be to greater service to the people for whom we work and for whom we need to care.
Very good. This has been fascinating, and we could go on, and I know you will. I know you had a wrap up, so maybe you could move to that now, and then we make a little time for questions.
Yeah, what is my wrap up is simply I wanted to show to all of you the icon that we have put at the entrance of our office here in Rome, the IIDC office, which shows Jesus Christ, the creator of safe space and safe relationships. And I had asked a Ukrainian artist to write the icon, as they say, and he proposed this traditional image of Christ, the healer, with on the left side the paralytic, on the right side the leper and the hemorrhaging woman. And I asked him to put in the iconography also, this is the traditional motive, but I asked him also to include a woman with her children. And for us here, this is the inspiration where we pass by every day a number of times, and that shows us the center of all what we try to do, to be present and available for those who have suffered, and to do what is within our reach, to be with them and to connect them with the healer and the one who really takes care of them in their existence, as well as to do whatever can be done so that young people and other people at risk can feel and be safe. I have also here a slide that summarizes the activities of the IIDC and a little bit of its history. For all those who are interested to have more information about what we do and how, for example, people can also study and enroll, there are some links on this page. I trust that you will receive through the Gregorian University Foundation the PDF of this presentation, so you can also have a look at that. And with this, I conclude this presentation and stop also the screen sharing and come back to the normal screen here.
Great, thank you very much. We have some questions. One listener who is a canon lawyer, actually, who has dealt with many abuse cases, wonders why those involved were not screened psychologically before they were ordained or given final vows or put into ministry, and why that didn't catch some of the some of the negative behaviors that developed from there. Could you respond to that?
Okay, I'll start, and Heather will jump in then. So first, today, the situation in the US and in many other countries is that there is psychological testing at the entrance and the screening process at the entrance into novitiate or seminary, and in many places also just before ordination. Today, the situation is very different to 30, 40, 50 years back. Secondly, this involvement of psychological testing and psychological accompaniment is part of the instruction, the official church documents instruction on the formation of priests and especially of seminarians. It is in the documents. Whether that is really implemented, that is obviously at the will of the bishop or the provincial, but in principle it is there, and in principle it is required. Thirdly, a psychological testing would identify, and I've trained people in this. This was part of my work for many years, testing, to teach testing and to teach also vocational interviewing. So you can do something about detecting red flags like malignant narcissism or deviant sexual desires. You can do something about that. But there are two problems. First, many of the abusers, and I talk about child abusers and also abusers of adult persons, would not fall within the range of psychopathology. They would not show signs of psychopathology, many of them. This is one of the myths that we need to deal with. Most church personnel that has abused sexually would not fall in the spectrum of severe psychopathology. There are, of course, cases of clear pedophiles that are diagnosable as such. But even then, many of those real pedophiles are very manipulative and very shrewd in the way to get around even psychological testing, and would not show much of a deviant science. So this is one problem. The second problem is that even if you have a report by a psychologist, psychiatrist, whatever you have involved in the screening, you need people on the other side, on the receiving side, like the rector of the seminary or the bishop or the provincial, to take the decisions and the willingness to take decisions when it comes to, for example, dismissal. And here we come to the core of the problem for the abuse cases and the cover-up of abuse cases. Very often that it was not a problem of not knowing about the severity of the crimes that have been committed, but the lack of willingness to take action. Heather, what are your thoughts about this?
I would echo everything that you've said. I would add as well, the person on the receiving end of any psychological report needs to know what to do with that information. And if it leads to a dismissal, as you were saying, but very often that report is going to someone who is not a mental health professional. So reading the report and digesting its meaning is difficult. And so you need someone who's receiving the report who can understand the nature of the information. I would echo as well that it might capture things more effectively, like malignant narcissism, which raises red flags for me for someone who might be ordained across all kinds of fronts, not specifically or exclusively to, is this person going to engage in sexual violence against a child or another person at risk, but certainly inclusive of that. So it's both, yes, we have a tool, it's not a foolproof tool. It is not a, oh, if only we'd given them this one test, we would have known, and then we could have said, no, we're not going to make you a priest because you scored a high number on this test. It doesn't work like that. But even when you get testing results that are indicative of red flags, the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. And so if we don't know of the past behavior, or it hasn't happened yet, or it's not disclosed or detected, it's very difficult then to say, this is someone who will abuse, this is not someone who will abuse. So I think we face this a lot with predictions of violent behavior in general. You know, why didn't we know that this person was going to pick up a gun and shoot up a school? Well, the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. And so predicting that first incident is incredibly difficult.
Very good. I'm glad we can draw on all your extensive experience here. We had another question. It says that the United States is very locked into prevention, protection, and compliance mode, a point you made, focused solely on sexual abuse of minors by clergy. How can the US move beyond this crisis management, which you referred to, way of thinking, to adopt a broader safeguarding culture? Does it begin at the local level, one diocese at a time, or does it need to come from the bishops as a body, or does it need to come as a mandate from a higher level like the Holy See? This is a question, I guess, of authority, of practical organizing. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, very good question from Susan, who also was with us at the International Safeguarding Conference 3 weeks back here. Wow. So my impression is really this needs to grow from bottom up. And the good news for me is I see a lot more people from bottom up engaged, interested, and committed. So that is, for me, a very good sign. The second thing I would say, promote wherever you are and whatever role you have in this, an approach that goes beyond the legal side or the canonical side only. I appreciate that the United States is very much focused on the legal side, and because you're in the States, you are very much, let me say, a litigious society where you have a lot of law cases going on. This is not the case in many other parts of the world. The problem is that when you focus only on the legal, on the delict side, that you forget that there is something beyond that would be helpful for the prevention of abuse, but also for the creation of safe space. And we need both sides. We need the legal, the canonical, the normative side, and we need the heart side. And the investment, from my point of view, in the context of the US, surely needs to be to reach out to many people, but in a different way, with a different pedagogy, with a different methodological approach, like with stories, like with symbols, like with images, so that you, or through art, or something like the healing gardens that are expanding in LA itself, or another, even at the national level now. Where you get to a different understanding, not only a cognitive intellectual one, but also to more of an affective approach in which you learn to deal with your emotions, your diverse emotional reactions to this, but also to integrate that and then to draw energy from it to create a different way of relating, which is a different way of a culture of safeguard.
I would say, in addition to that, all of that, which I agree with, I would say it's not just at the local level, but it's at the individual relationship level. I think each of us are in a position to contribute something to safeguarding, and what we may contribute is perhaps more to the focus of the spirit of it or the heart of it. And the relationships that we're in, the relationships we're in with survivors, the relationships we're in with colleagues, what we take to church with us on Sunday and we chat with the person in the pew next to us about, all of those are opportunities to bring that spirit of safeguarding as a process, that spirit of envisioning a church that is rooted in sacred space and sacred relationship. It gives us that opportunity and that platform. We need those conversations happening at all levels in the church. And I think I can say with confidence that it is happening at all levels, maybe not as broadly at each level as I would like. And I've got a bit of a reputation for being impatient around that at times, actually most of the time. But I do think the conversations are happening. And honestly, on some of the darkest days in this work, when I feel the most overwhelmed or burdened, I'm trying very hard to remind myself that as church, we're in the position of changing the world with what we're doing and what we're trying to bring forward. We really are, because what we're doing within the church is then carried out into the world by everybody when they walk out the door. And so that lifts me up, that there are conversations happening now because of the reckoning that we've gone through and because of the way that we're engaging in it. And so we are making change happen, but I'd be all for accelerating that a little faster, to be honest.
Very good. What a wonderful statement there. We're in the business of changing the world, and it's true. It's why we exist. I have one question from the rector of a seminary. He says they have cases of seminarians who have what he calls problematical desires, but no reportable criminal behaviors. And those will be dismissed from the seminary. And he asks, is there something else they can do? Is there a more developmental approach for candidates in that gray area who they may raise some yellow flags. There may be some issues there, but do they have to just be dismissed, or is there a way you can work with them?
Yes, surely one can work with every human being. In every human being, there is potential. Second, that potential needs to be, let me say, awakened, and the person himself, now in the case of a seminarian, the person himself needs to want to work on that. The willingness to contribute to that is fundamental, and that needs to be proven. And not only by compliance, not only by submissiveness, and in exchange for being readmitted or continuing in the seminary, but really showing a personal engagement in one's own substantial conversion process. Thirdly, in practical terms, I would say what is needed is a concrete, detailed plan for a year or 2 years in which outside the seminary, the person can prove himself. And that needs to be signed by the seminarian himself, and it needs to be clearly sanctioned. It needs to be very closely supervised by competent people. And it needs also the involvement of women, of men, of lay people, of psychologists, of a variety of competences that can have close contact with that person And at the end, the one person who will decide on readmission or final dismissal needs to be able to read that different voices. And of course, as we have learned, unfortunately, over the last years and decades, when there are the yellow flags, in all probability, some of those yellow flags turn red over time. And therefore, let me say, the inclination would be to be more cautious than lenient. Of course, every person has a right to prove that they better themselves, but that needs to be very strictly monitored and supervised and then decided.
Yeah, I'm afraid we have to close now. We've reached our time limit, but that's a good insight. It seems that because this has been so hard on the church, it's created so many different problems. There really is a risk aversion now, and I think what Heather talked about is getting beyond crisis mode to think more in terms of creating a positive attitude in space is what we need. I want to thank you both and thank all of our attendees too. And the foundation is very proud to be part of this work. We've supported Father Zollner in his work with a number of grants and many gifts from our donors, and that's helped to make his work possible. He's been worked very hard to get the funding he needs. It's not just there for him. He's created this whole effort really by bringing together the resources needed, and the Gregorian Foundation is proud to contribute to that. And I would urge our listeners to think about contributing to this effort, because it's something that needs to grow and spread and has tremendous potential for the church. So thank you both for all the insights you brought us and for your dedication to this work. And we'll continue to pray for you and support you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Heather, for the conversation. And thank you for the invitation to Father McFarland and all those who have made it possible, also from the Gregorian University Foundation team. I'm really grateful for all the support, also for Father McFarland, who is now at the end of the month taking on another mission. So I would like to thank you also in this occasion for all the attention you have given to our work. And thank you to all those who have been with us here and all those who want and can contribute to our mission. Thank you.